Hello. Hi, knitters. Hi, crocheters.
Hope you're having a good knitting and, yes, working evening. Hope you're working on something fun.
It's like it's the weekend, you know.
Yeah.
I see Lauren, so I'm gonna.
This guy down here? No. There we go.
Aha.
There we go. Hey!
Lauren, hi.
Hi, it's so great to see you.
Yes. Great to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good.
Good. It feels nice. It feels like, you know, we've hit the weekend. So
yes, the sliding into the weekend is the best feeling, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. More knitting time.
Yes, I know. I feel like I'm gonna switch up my work week in that tomorrow I'm gonna just take a day, and well, I'm gonna knit. I'm gonna work on our knit along, but then I'll do other work on Saturday. You know,
Perfect. That's the way to do it, right? Then you can focus your energy when there aren't as many distractions and people around, and that's sort of the key to a Friday off, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm going to need to do some lake, park myself in front of a lake to get some of that quiet, private knitting time.
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness. Is it cold, or is it, you can park anywhere, I guess, but did you say by a lake?
I'll keep the heat on in my car. I will be sitting in
yeah, I mean,
perfect.
It's terribly cold right now. This afternoon I tried to go out for a walk, and I did go for a walk for a very short period of time, but I'm not usually like this, but I just was like, I can't go any further. It was so cold. It said it was like
cold.
14, but feels like 0.
Yeah. Oh, that's tough.
I just couldn't do it. So,
yeah,
yeah,
it's one of those. Yeah.
What are you knitting right now?
Yeah.
Oh, I have a Stormy Sky Shawl. Actually, I just popped it in my lap and it fell off. But Life is Cozy, Stormy Skies.
Love it.
Yeah, it has these double drop stitches, which I just love when you go down that purl row and you can drop those double yarn overs. It's just sort of satisfying. It's like the let it go stitch. That's what I call it.
Awesome.
Yeah. I have my little twill and print on there. Isn't it cute? Always marking the right side.
Will you keep it for you, or
That's a really good question. I was gifted this yarn by one of our Project Knitwell volunteers, actually. She went to Uruguay, and this was actually from the Manos Uruguay factory. Isn't that cool?
That's
awesome. So she visited, and I think it's just beautiful, though. I'm doubling it, so it has a little bit of extra texture to it, and I thought that was so generous of her. She's one of our most devoted, I don't know if she's here, but Susan Sell is one of our most devoted volunteers. And she has been, I think she has literally worked in all of our sites, which is really a wonderful, she's really a great person to share our mission too. She's just been such a person that understands what we're going for, and she's a former clinical psychologist, so I think she has the mindset and understands what it takes to knock on those hospital room doors and just open the door, and you're not sure what you're going to be greeted with, but for sure you want to interact with them human to human, and teach them how to knit, ideally giving them a lifelong wellness tool. So it's been really it's been so nice to get to know all of our volunteers. And
how many do you have? How many sites do you guys go to, and how many volunteers work with you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. At our peak, I think we had close to 50 volunteers, but with the pandemic, things have shifted quite a bit. So we have almost 20 volunteers working in the cloud. So we have virtual knitting sessions with folks that are facing stressful situations, caregivers and nurses. And those are folks that, we can't usually reach them when we're in the hospital, but it's so great to work with them after hours. So that's about half of our knitters right now. But right now we have 29 active volunteer slots in person. So we're really lucky that we've been able to maintain, we're in we were with an Afghan refugee group. We're in a shelter for recently incarcerated women. We're going back to N Street Village, where we are very popular with the homeless population at N Street Village, teaching them to knit. They're very, very industrious knitters.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So yeah, how did it start, and then how do you work with, like, now you're established, how do you find new sites or new outreaches, or how does that work?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. And that's really a big part of my job, which I'm really excited about because there's so much potential. Project Knitwell started formally as a nonprofit in 2010. Our founder, Carol Caparosa, she was a mother of a pediatric cardiology patient. And she had so many surgeries and so many wait times, and she was given a tiny baby sweater. Her daughter was an infant and facing these very stressful surgeries. And it sparked an idea. I should go and dig out that yarn that I have in the back of my closet, because she just felt like she could only focus on worry. She was really good at worrying. She was like, what else can I do besides worry? And she has this funny story that she tells about how she was convinced that all the clocks in the hospital must have been broken because they never moved. And, you know, when you're facing so many hours of worry and waiting, it really does feel like time just slows down immensely. And so she dug that yarn out of the back of her closet and found that it was really an immediate sense of solace. It gave her something else to focus on. And she started realizing this is something that I should help other people find as well. And so many years later, she went back to that very same hospital where she had waited all of those hours. And she started teaching those family members that were waiting, the patients themselves, and started knocking on those hospital room doors and giving people the opportunity to learn to knit in that setting at the point where they really need comfort. At Project Knitwell, we're focused on wellness, comfort, and community. And comfort really in the hospital setting is so crucial to what we do. But the wellness piece is really the preventative piece. So it's, you know, setting up your parachute before you're actually facing a critical situation where you need a point of solace, right? So if you already know how to knit, that's really a blessing for you when you hit that critical point. It gives you a chance to have that sense of self-efficacy, that you're good at something. And then you have a chance to really unwind with a community, right? So the third piece I think is really crucial. Our volunteer community is very strong. We're really lucky to have such dedicated volunteers that really understand what it's like to have that personal connection with folks while knitting. I think we all feel that in so many ways. And I know owning a yarn shop, you must feel that all the time, right? The connection that you build is really, I think, really powerful.
Yeah, and that's been fun, well, interesting, but, you know, with the stitch, open stitch that we do on Saturdays, being able to connect everybody that it's no longer just Leelanau County, it's everyone all over. And so we get this visual reminder of how we are all connected, and like, that's right. And last week was really cool where they were saying, they were like, people that had never hung out together actually met up at a show and then ran into someone else on the video call on accident. And it was really cool how it's really, really, we are so connected. And it's
I love that so much. And it's really been a silver lining of the pandemic. You know, many of us wouldn't have met so many people from outside of our communities, and, you know, having the opportunity to reach out and teach knitting online was not anything we would have ever really imagined doing. But we've been really successful. We had over 100 new knitters through Knitwell in the Cloud this year. And it's really an exciting, I think it's really an exciting way to build community and a broader approach, and really give people the mindset that knitting isn't just a hobby or a luxury, but it really is something that's good for you in so many ways. And, you know, we can ignite all sorts of good neurotransmitters and, you know, that preventative medicine, it's really, really true. And so any way that we can spread that mission, and I'm so glad that we get a chance to talk to you today, because it's giving us a chance to share that with more people. So I appreciate it.
Yes.
Do you guys have like specific patterns that you go when you're doing like a cold call of someone to help, and you're like, we know that this is like a nice way, that it's like an easy one to get right into those?
Right. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So we have a book called our resource guide, and we've published many editions. We're working on a revision of it right now, and it has really our tried and true patterns in it that are very, very simple. Many of them, we give everyone that we knit with a starter kit, which includes 4 lines of 14 stitches already knit for that.
Oh, that's
so. Yeah, it's it's really the key way to do it. So we have cast on for them. Casting on is not the first step in the process.
That would be awesome at the hospital.
Yeah. Exactly. But it has some really great patterns and really great stories in it as well that talk about the comfort of knitting along with the patterns. And we really find that providing this resource guide has really been key, because it's something that we can leave with them. It has pictures, so it gives them guidance, and it hopefully will, even if we don't get a chance to meet with them again, it hopefully will keep them knitting. And it's easy to tuck in their bag and so forth.
Yeah, because I thought of one story that reminded me. I was thinking of like, well, what is a good thing that, like, if you're trying to get someone to feel the comfort of knitting, and I feel like my knitting time right now is very anxious and not stress relieving. It's like, I've got a deadline. That's the only time. So how do you like, do you pick bulky yarn that's like single ply and super soft, and a hat, something like rewarding and not like what I started my sister when she really wanted to knit. I was like, this easy infinity cowl will be great. And I gave her silk lace weight yarn on metal needles, and it took her like 8 weeks, and it was awful. Like, do that. Like, so do you guys kind of like lean them towards the things that like will make sure they keep going?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's really key, is having that sense of satisfaction, that dopamine kick when you cast off. I mean, that's a real thing. And we want to provide quality materials that they'll be successful with. So we really focus on, you know, very, very durable yarn that isn't splitty. We have bamboo needles that are really, they're very successful. We start off on size 8s, and we really have found that many of our knitters come back over and over again to this patterns that they find. Excuse me. So it's really a fun way to do it.
Do they usually start with hats or scarves, or where do they usually start off at?
Yeah, well, the first thing that they knit isn't really anything.
Oh, okay.
Because it's 14 stitches, but we have had people turn them into cup koozies, which is really fun, or those twisted headbands, which is really a fun thing. But it really just depends on what they're going for. But the project yarn that we give them is typically a bulky yarn. We give them size 15 needles as well.
Oh, cool.
So it's a starter kit along with a project kit. And those size 15s, I mean, you can cook on those, right? You can,
right.
Yeah. So that bulky yarn and especially the yarn is a little bit undersized for the needle. So that creates like a really nice loose texture. We find that sometimes people are really tight knitters at first. So giving them that bigger needle solves that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you guys do for yarn? Where do you have like one supplier that you do all your yarn with, or how does that work? That's
a really good question. It has changed over the years. We've had partnerships with Lauren Brennan. We get a lot of really solid yarn donations from different organizations, individuals also. So we are currently accepting yarn donations of banded yarn. It's a lot to manage. People are so generous with their yarn stash. You would not imagine. It's really, just today, I felt like Santa Claus. I was walking out of our parcel post with this giant bag of really great bulky yarn. But we are really focused on providing materials that we find the most success with. So our Afghan refugee group is very productive. So we find that we're part of the reason that we're accepting so much donated yarn is we're really able to provide even full blankets and larger quantities of yarn through donations. So it's really nice. We also have grants that fund some of our yarn. So we're really very lucky when it comes to having access to really quality materials and knitters that are really generous. So all knitters are generous.
And you said Afghan Blankets. Do you have people that are knitting blankets for donating to people, or they're just, or how does that, what is that part?
Yeah, well, our Afghan refugees many of them, three of the women in our knitting circle just had babies, which is really fun. And they are really into knitting blankets, which is really fun. So it's you know, they were making scarves taller than they were, and we thought, oh, we need to provide more yarn so they can expand out and make it into a full-size blanket. And it's been really fun to knit with them. Even there's a language barrier, so we occasionally will have a translator available with us. But it's amazing how you can teach knitting across a language barrier. It really, as long as you can see each other's hands, it's remarkable how easy it is to communicate and really how quickly you pick up a language that's really nonverbal. I really have found that that's been really a rewarding part of the experience for our volunteers. And then also the women in the group are learning English and more confidence in their English by communicating with our volunteers, which is really a positive influence of the whole program. And one woman just secured a job, which is really exciting for her. And so it's really a nice way to feel like we're building a sense of community that isn't about their base level needs, right? It's about finding enjoyment in something and finding a way to give back to their family and building that sense of self-efficacy that it's really hard when you're in crisis to find that. So
yeah.
That's amazing. And do you feel like in this particular group, do you feel like did any of the refugees already know how to knit? I mean, did they bring any handwork with them?
That's a great question. Yeah, some of them did learn when they were very young. Okay. I got the impression that it was sort of similar to like the Waldorf tradition where they teach them very, very young, but many of them hadn't knit for years. Some were just brand new, but you could tell they're really good at working with their hands. And it's funny, when you meet people, you can sort of immediately tell how comfortable they feel, how dexterous they are. But the people who don't think that they're crafty or they don't think that they're good with their hands, those are the people that feel the strongest sense of satisfaction when they're able to overcome that. And there's actual evidence of that. You don't necessarily have to be good at something to feel a sense of accomplishment. And I think that that's a really interesting, you really get the same dopamine kick, even if you're not successful. So it's,
well, in that reverse thing of like someone who's not crafty means they haven't been doing it. So they like, I can't do it, where they've mentally told themselves they can't do it. So they have this kind of, this confidence level that is, so low that it's like, all they had to do was try. And again, starting with 15s and the bulky needles, and like, I can do this. And that I think is really cool, of just like, in any of these walks of life, in any of these things that you're having a hard moment of, just having whether that dopamine, but just bringing that self-confidence of being able to then take on the world of whatever is those things, is like, I am better. I am capable. I can do things. And that's pretty cool.
And sometimes it requires you being side by side with someone else who's telling you. I mean, you can only pull yourself up, I think, so much. You can only talk yourself into, oh, okay, I can do this. But even hearing it from somebody else feels a lot better, I think.
Well, when you're in your own head, keep saying, I can't do that. I can't do that. There's no way I could do that. When someone's next to you saying, yes, you can. Let me show you. Yes, you can. Let me show you. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. And we don't get a lot of opportunities to cheer people on like that, where it's just really the raw, the really just, it's, if you don't have any preconceived notions of what they're thinking, or what, they're motivated just simply to cheer the other person on. And I think it makes both people feel like, I think it's equally rewarding for our volunteers to see them learn, and to actually see a new knitter be born is very exciting, actually. And
Yeah.
That sense of, look, I did it.
And that's something I heard, and I just keep, every few days, I feel like I keep finding another scenario that that echoes this, is that, when we see pain, that pain isn't just a singular thing, that there is that other component of compassion. Whether you are receiving the compassion or being part of the compassion, is that other part that is that kind of positive to that negative that always comes with it. It doesn't come alone, where it's given the volunteers have the opportunity to now be a part of compassion and give compassion, and it gives the person going through struggle and pain seeing what compassion looks like receiving it. And so I like that double-edged coin, that it's like compassion comes along with it, and is such a piece that I think we kind of sometimes forget comes along naturally with pain. Is there is that piece of seeing who's coming along with you, and how that is work that they get to be involved in, and when you do that compassion for someone and you work that muscle more, how you start to see, like, this is so rewarding, and this does fill my bucket, and it does help me become a better person. And of course the other person benefits so much from receiving your compassion. It's just kind of been a cool piece to looking at how we all really can have rewards from pain.
Right, absolutely. And really thinking about, the struggles that we've all been facing, right? I mean, we have a global pandemic going on, but the other major pandemic is the pandemic of loneliness, right? And that is we have just been faced with such a period of intense loneliness for so many people. And I think that the knitting community really as a whole has so much to offer in so many ways when it comes to feeling lonely. I mean, there's so much community that surrounds the knitting community. I think that just being in community with others that are knitting is just the first layer of that iceberg, right? I mean, there's so much. And I really do think that the more compassion that we have for each other when it comes to that sense of loneliness and finding those outlets, I really think that there's so much potential for us to be able to provide for each other. And really, when it comes to knitting, I think sometimes you find that your knitting needles are keeping you company too, right? It doesn't have to be another person, but as you're creating that item, you can also start thinking about the show and tell later on, right? You'll be able to show it off to someone. And, as adults, we don't get enough opportunity for show and tell. And we have an online group where at the end of each session, we share what we've been working on. And I think universally, every knitting circle, when you meet, the show and tell is part of it, right? And I think, we all loved show and tell as kids, right? So I think that's the beauty of finished objects. And
having those groups where you're constantly like, you can see a knitter that isn't in your group walking down the street with a sweater and instantly talk with them and bond with them. And people are like, the rest of your group that isn't knitters are like, why would you stop and talk to that person, touch their sweater? But like, we know that that's something we want. And
like the knitter's handshake.
Yes.
Like,
oh. I love the knitter's handshake. Oh my goodness.
Yes. And it's, I mean, I think that it's also, for any of us, all of us who struggle with depression, low grade or deeply, when you have this goal that you're working towards, like, okay, we're going to meet on Wednesdays, that even just knowing that someone is waiting to see your face or seeing your name, even if you do not present your face on the screen and it's black, it's just like, because when people don't show up for a while, we're like, hey, have you heard from, Lori? Lori is in British Columbia, forest fires, you know, and so we were like, has anybody heard from Lori? Just different, you know, how is Julie? She's teaching, you know, has she been staying safe? And so it's just sort of like that piece of being wanted, being included, being a part of a group, keeps you going whether you know it or not. And in fact even promotes you making progress on your sweater. Like
it's
because
like that homework you have to do. We're kind of like, it almost reminds, well, just another group like that you, okay, I know I've got to go every week, and whether it's kind of like I should be there, but I don't know if I really want to go. And then once you get there, you do end up feeling filled up, and you do end up like, yes, I should probably do some knitting. And so you have those times of like, you did take those few minutes to sit down, even though my projects is causing me some, it does give me some sense of relief of actually sitting, and better than the other things I would be doing or whatnot, you know. It is having you work a little bit harder to sit down or have that
making time for,
because we feel obligated, and not like that's a good reason to do, but if it's a reason that makes us do it, then that's a plus.
Well, it's a motivator, really. I think it's so, knitting is as a whole is so motivating, right? Because there's the beginning of the project, the baby shawl, right? You've got the little baby shawl, and then, you know, it's so motivating because once you get to the middle of the project, it really feels like, oh, just a little bit more. And there's something to that. And then, you know, the finish line, there's just so much to that sense of satisfaction and really trying so many new things too, right? I mean, there's this whole slew of research about trying new things and going outside of the box of what you're typically doing. So they talk about, you know, trying new patterns, trying new techniques, and knitting. There's just so many opportunities. I mean, I feel like I've been knitting for a really long time, and I haven't even scratched the surface of all of the techniques and different things that you can learn. I keep turning on brioche videos and then not really actually getting the yarn to actually do it, but I kind of generally know how to do it. And I keep thinking, why haven't I just done that? Right? Why haven't I just tried it? And it's almost like I'm savoring it, right? Because every time I go back and I see a little bit of that video, I'm like, oh yeah, it's something new, right? And that's sparking different neurotransmitters. It's, you know, it's literally connecting new synapses in your brain. And I think that there's so much power to that.
Brain.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're really excited about at Project Knitwell is finding ways to put research, scientific data behind all of the things that you and I already know, right? So we want to figure out how can we prove these benefits? And there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of qualitative data, but how can we quantify this? How can we really, I don't know if there are any great academics or principal investigators out there, but give me a call. We would love to be part of that research and provide the research subjects. You know, our knitters, our volunteers, and the new knitters that we're working with, they're subjects that are waiting to be researched. And there's all this research about curiosity going on and trying new things. And anybody that's willing to try out knitting for the first time, especially when we're approaching them, right? Sort of sight unseen, and they haven't really chosen this as a potential hobby themselves, but we're literally knocking on their door and saying, hey, would you like to try this? Those people that say yes, they have a certain type of curiosity about them, right? They have a certain way that they're being open to trying something new. And that's really, that I think is really a great mentality for, especially when people are facing crisis. If they're able to open themselves up like that, I think there's really a lot to that. And I'm really excited to work with more hospitals, to work with more organizations. I know you talked earlier about, you know, how do we make those connections? And I see Susan Wilner, hi, on here just now. I just spoke with her for the first time last week at a hospital on Long Island. And we're so excited to provide kits for her resilience room, where we can provide the opportunity for them to scan that QR code and log in and sign up to be part of Knitwell in the Cloud and have those one-on-one lessons. So we're really looking for more ways to partner, and we're excited about that. So I'm hoping that we can build more connections, and even populations that we haven't connected with yet. Right before the pandemic, we were in the DC prison system, and that was really powerful. And obviously we'll get back there at some point, but you know, those populations, we recently started a partnership with the Veterans Administration. That will be sort of a newer population for us, but the Wounded Warriors Project. Teachers, I mean, we've worked with teachers in the past, obviously, but the unprecedented levels of burnout that teachers are facing. I just think that we've focused a lot on caregivers in hospitals, and those are teachers. I mean, these are heroes that need a chance to knit their own cape, right?
Yeah.
We want to provide them that opportunity, and we're excited to find ways to do that more, and really just give people a mindset that knitting is good for you. And it really isn't about having, you know, we're not on like the self-care bandwagon, you know, we're not art therapists, we're not doing therapy. We're just very simply approaching in a very straightforward way. You know, this is something that scientifically is really good for you, and you should give it a try. And it's one of many outlets. You know, it could be that you're really into running, or you're really into yoga, or you're really, you know, I don't run unless I'm chased, so those aren't my outlets. But, you know, and knitting isn't for everyone, but I think so many people find that they surprise themselves, and sometimes it's really a solid match for them. And we cross so many barriers with our, we have a group of children, or teenagers really, that have emotional challenges at a school up in Maryland. And the majority of that group, they earn their knitting sessions with us with essentially good behavior. And the majority of those students are boys. And, you know, that's really powerful too. There shouldn't be any barriers to knitting, and all of these stereotypes of, you know, grandma in the rocking chair. No way. That is so, so over. You know?
And, you know, one thing too that I think really, I find interesting too, that like, whether it's someone who's, again, sitting there in pain and needs distraction from worry, and maybe needs to broaden their mind and look to learn something or focus on a technique, and then versus, I think, at the end of a busy week, thinking of the teachers and the caregivers who are like, I need something mindless that my hands can do. Like that other, it can do both of those things. And, but one thing I was kind of wondering is like, how do you help really work with the people that are like, yeah, I don't have enough time. I don't have time. Like, I am overstressed. I just, all I want to do is just laying on a couch. I don't have time for that. And how do you help get them to a place to be like, this really will be.
You need to do this.
I guess what are some of the talking points? Because we have a fair amount of that with people that just sort of walk in the store, or
I need to convince myself, like, how do I get myself to actually do it? Because I'll be like, I don't know, I can't even squeeze out the time. So what is a good thing to convince myself to sit down and
to think about it? That is, I think that's really powerful. And what you're doing when you sit down to knit is you're releasing the relaxation response. So Herbert Benson talked about how do we balance our lives? How do we come back to center? How do we lower our blood pressure? So if you're faced with a situation where you're really worked up, and you can tell that you're really worked up, turning to something like knitting, which is a repetitive movement, right? So anything repetitive can serve that purpose. So the relaxation response is allowing you to come back possibly from a fight or flight response, right? So you might have had an actual response. It might just be that you've had a really busy, exhausting day. And what you need to do is really reorganize whatever is making you feel tired, was obviously exhausting your brain in some way, right? It was, you were firing on all cylinders. And I think of it as you have these highways in your brain, and all of these synapses are firing throughout the day. And if you don't give yourself a chance for those roads to be clear at the end of the day, they're gonna be all congested when you wake up in the morning. You're gonna have this traffic jam in your head because your synapses are not clear, right? You literally haven't released enough of the good neurotransmitters. And instead you have all of these confusing neurotransmitters that are kind of, interacting in weird ways and crossing lines, and, there's sparks going off in weird places. And sometimes people just feel like, I think a lot of times, sometimes people just feel off, right? And you're not really sure why, and you don't really know how to make sense of it. And really, you don't need to make sense of it. You just need to turn to something repetitive like knitting to recharge and reorganize all of those synapses in your brain that are just, they're doing weird things. We are chemical beings, right? We are just a walking sludge bag of chemicals, right? And so how do we take control and like harness those good neurotransmitters? How do we get more of the good things and less of the confusing things in our life? And that relaxation response, those repetitive movements, Tai Chi, yoga, all of that is prescribed by doctors, especially in the United Kingdom. They will tell their patients, go to this Tai Chi class or go to this yoga class. And they are just now starting to prescribe knitting to people that may not be interested, or maybe they already do yoga and they've covered those bases, right? They have that movement structure in their life. But knitting is providing them another opportunity that's more portable. They can do it in the waiting room, right? They can do it at their kids' soccer game, or the places that all parents have to wait, right? In the car. You can't get out of your car and do like a Tai Chi routine, but you can be sitting in your car knitting, right?
Right.
So that's, that's kind of, I guess you could get out of the car and do a Tai Chi routine if you really want to, but that's a commitment.
I'd like to see someone do that if they would
Absolutely
do that.
Yeah. But I mean, that so makes sense, especially when you think about all of these situations. If you are a person at all who struggles with like times when you're even, I think we all can recognize this sometimes in ourselves, oftentimes in other people, whatever, when you're in a public place and people are just sort of waiting. And what is the first thing that everyone does? Like, you get out your phone because you can't, it's just because heaven forbid we should have to sit in discomfort or silence. Or for me, sometimes I feel like and this is awful, and I'm working on shifting this mentality, but almost like wasting my time. Like, well, I could be doing so much here while I'm waiting, which is just, that's another issue. But it's sort of like, instead of, so, you're sitting there and you're getting a little nervous. Like, you're getting nervous while you're waiting. You're getting nervous even I don't know if I want to sit in this waiting room because who's sick here, who isn't sick here, or the thing that is coming. I often fixate on the thing that is coming, whatever it might be, that I can't control. But so instead of, biting your nails, mindless scrolling, which always makes me feel worse, smoking cigarettes, all of those nervous tics and habits that are little time chunks or whatever, I feel infinitely better. And it's a muscle I have to flex for sure. But doing it and just being like, okay, keep the phone away, do a row. Just work on a row here.
One more row. Yes.
And always taking something that's very mindless and tiny. And like, I finished a pair of socks this year that I have had on the needles absolutely for 5 years, just because it's like, maybe it'll be a while, or
I need to do that. I need to have something. I was like, at some point I'm like, even if I just have a circle, even if I just have a tube that I can just do, because I've always like, that's a good idea. And how many years down the road I've never had a portable project that's just stockinette that I can take somewhere.
What I take the tiniest bits of yarn with me, and I end up making these strips, and then I make them into these braided balls. And I've made them for years. They're a really great little kid gift, at a baby shower. But these strips, like literally, I would just knit these tiny little strips, and then you bind them together, And, you know, it's literally just back and forth, back and forth. And I have the tiniest little needles that I tuck into my bag. And then isn't it fun? It's a Gevlockton. It's a Gevlockton ball. And they're great stress relief, actually. I love to, like, you know, like an old stress ball. Does anyone use stress balls anymore? I think this is like the perfect knit stress ball.
I love that.
Isn't it fun? It's stretchy, a little bit stretchy, right? Yeah.
And I love what you were saying earlier too about, like, or just with the idea that, like, you know, at the end of the day, needing to get the neurotransmitters to go in the right spot, but also just with the idea, I think when we're getting overwhelmed of, like, today's awful, tomorrow's gonna be awful, like, there's just so much, and just being like, if I take the time because I need to set up tomorrow better, how can I set up tomorrow better? Like, if I'm just worried about everything, I need to, instead of saying I don't have time to because everything's so crazy, then if tomorrow's going to be crazy, I should just try to keep working on the crazy to do less crazy.
Right.
But instead, like, let's just get the neurotransmitters better so I'll wake up.
It's a necessity, really. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. And the more that people think about it that way, the better off they'll be. And I think that going back to the doom scrolling, I call it, you know, where you're just stuck on your phone and suddenly you realize, oh no, this is not going in the right direction, or you're literally ruminating on your phone. I mean, your finger is ruminating for you, right? It's just a constant. And we found that, we had a group at the University of Delaware of nursing students that we taught to knit. And I was so thrilled because on their exit survey, there were 2 of them that said, you know, the best part about this program is that I haven't been sitting around on my phone. I've been knitting instead. And I thought, oh my gosh, if there's one reason for these folks to learn, I mean, that really was a powerful message. And I do feel that. I feel that if you have knitting available to you, it's really just a way to not just reorganize and, you know, initiate that relaxation response, but also to avoid things that are just not necessary or just maybe harmful in a way.
Absolutely. And we think about that a lot. I mean, I'm starting, you know, my children are too young for, you know, they do not have phones yet. But those days are coming. And I feel like one of the thoughts behind, like we didn't know how to knit when we were younger. I didn't learn until I was in college, and then I taught Liz. So I was, you know, 20 when I learned. I wish that I would have learned when I was younger. I wish that I would have known in high school. We did other sort of like crafty things, and we always had, but you know,
we didn't have the phones though.
But we didn't have
the temptation of that.
We didn't have phones, and I feel like, and also I don't think that in our household necessarily do we model appropriate behavior always. In that, you know, do I leave my phone totally turned off or at the door when I walk in so that my children never see me on my phone? Absolutely not. No, I'm on my phone too. So anyway, as they start to not just, and I also feel like a community piece would be, I'd like my children, my older daughter does know how to knit, and she is knitting a little bit. She's knitting half her sister. But I also think that learning this earlier would be, is just a really good way of being. I mean, I feel like this with our peers, our friends, because we have lots of friends that I feel like don't knit, are non-knitters. Lots of my friends, of course, lots of people that are here on this call are our friends because we've met you all through the shop. But our other friends, and I feel like I wish that other friends were picking this up, because it's such a preventative, you know, for the doomsday scrolling, for just getting into, and I'd like to teach my children. And then when I feel like that's something that we've sort of locked into, Liz and I have talked a lot about wanting to have, we just have never been able to do it, mostly because of the pandemic. I think that 2020 was a year that we were really moving forward toward having an after school program here, whether it was here at the shop, whether we took it remotely to one of the schools, or the old art building or something, to have a program, because for all of those,
some of those hours that, like, again, parents are either still working or whatnot, where that is a very easy, especially for me too. They're like, get your tablet, just get something where I'm too busy, you know, where kids have some hours that they need to fill and can fill it with something good or something not good. And having, like you said, like having that parachute ready, that even if it's something they aren't using now, but building some muscle memory now, that maybe when it comes to college and they're in some stressful times, that they will then hopefully maybe get a perk to bring back to something like that. Or, you know, I mean, even one thing I remember hearing with our grandmother when she was really far along with her dementia, and she used to be a knitter, and they really didn't really know what to do for her during the day. So at one point, they did a bunch of different things. One time they just handed her some yarn and knitting needles, and she just started knitting.
Oh.
And we would say,
we're like, what?
And we would say, Grandmary, what are you knitting? And she was like, oh, I don't know.
But it was just,
she would just knit. That's
doing.
That's so wonderful. I mean, that's proof that there are literal channels in her brain, right? That are igniting.
And we never, I mean, that was like just a few years ago. Since the time we were born, practically, we haven't seen her knit. Like, she didn't knit like for like decades.
No, neither of our grandmothers.
And so she knit well before, stopped for decades, and then muscle memory was still there.
Wow.
And half of, you know, when most of her brain wasn't there, but it was still locked in important spots. So.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's just amazing. If you think about how amazing that is. I mean, the neuroscientists, we need to get them in line. Are there any neuroscientists that knit? Because I need to talk to them.
Oh, I'm sure of it. I'm sure.
Well, someone had posted here earlier saying Stephanie McPhee has done some research.
Yes, she did a really great Fiberside chat. And I don't know if they'll make that available, but it was wonderful. And she really focused on research, focused on that repetitive, they don't call it knitting very often in the research. They call it repetitive rote movements and repetitive structural blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it's really kind of funny. It's like they think of knitting as maybe too basic, or I don't know, knitting gets a weird
word, otherwise it doesn't sound serious.
Yes. And you know, she had this whole tirade during that talk actually about how people don't take knitting seriously. And I just find that well, first of all, it's obnoxious, right? I mean, I don't understand that. But also it's so peculiar, because where did we get this idea or this notion that knitting is somehow lesser than other things that we do with our hands or things that we create? Or it's really, there's some weird stereotypes, I think. I have a great aunt whose father taught her how to knit. And, you know, that was not that many generations ago, right? So, you know, where do we get this notion that that knitting is really, you know, kind of a specific type of dynamic, and really breaking down those barriers is also part of our mission. We're really focused on diversity and inclusion and figuring out ways that, you know, we don't have to have crafts that have stereotypes. That doesn't make any sense.
In addition to breaking down the stigma behind, even when people, and we talked about this, you and I talked about this, but just sort of like, you know, not your grandmother's knitting. Well, what is wrong with that?
That's like, not,
I mean, I think to undercut constantly the value of being taught by the generations previous, by your, you know, future ancestors, by the people who have come before you. I think that's it's so tasteless, and it's so
right, and so we just disrespect people that have so much wisdom versus being like, well, they're not in the know anymore. You know, it's just like, instead of being like, maybe they actually have all the knowledge, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
But it makes me think too, of kind of like some of those stigmas of like, did some of those things change of when fast fashion started becoming a thing?
Absolutely.
When we started not having when we weren't milling things, when people weren't making their own clothes anymore because you could get them at a store. So you were privileged if you could get it at a store. So it all of a sudden wasn't the cool thing to do. And you were lesser than if you did those things, or if someone made those things for you, means you were poor or something like that. If you started to create some of those things instead of like, this is what your loved ones did for you, was make a garment that fit just you with your thought in mind. And maybe some people were like, well, my thought in mind, no one asked me what I wanted. My mom made an outfit that I didn't ask for in that color and not in a pattern I wanted. You know? Right. Probably some of that stigma where they're like, I grew up being like, no, I'll buy my own clothes. But there's probably some of that, give or take.
There's some of that.
I think it was probably marketed really well for us to buy things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's true. And sometimes we forget about the sentimental nature of all these hand knits are so sentimental. And we had an online session with a group out of Nigeria, actually, and they had many different types of artists on that call. And there was a musician actually who was inspired by the conversation we were having. I was talking about wellness for knitting, and he brought out all of these beautiful sweaters that his mom had made for him. And he talked about, he actually had yarn, and he was like, I'm going to pick this up and knit with it this afternoon, just because I talked to you. And, you know, he was so inspired to think about, my grandmother created this just with me in mind. And he had the mindset of, every stitch that she put in, she was probably thinking of me. And I said, yes, absolutely. And that's the beauty of knitting something for someone else. You really, the tradition of prayer shawls and all of that. I mean, there's real sentimentality, and it's not just frivolous sentimentality. I mean, it's really meaningful. And I really think that, there are ways that layers on top of all of these other benefits, right? The ability to give something and pass something down that's really an heirloom, or just to give a gift, right? To give someone something that will keep them cozy all year long.
Right. I see that you need, you need a new hat. Yeah. And it doesn't even that whatever you want it to be, like knitting can be something that's very precious to you, or something that could be just super practical, and it's okay if you blow through the heels, because at least your feet were warm this season, and that's all I cared about. And
and that's one thing too, that like injecting that something into our culture, which I think has never been a Western culture thing,
that we've seen in this generation.
And we'll just, even in a very different way. I was listening to, it was probably now a year ago that I was doing a class, but this one was talking specifically about, well, it was in a lot of African cultures, but when they're making clothing, I mean, it's going down to, you go and you pick out the color. I mean, they're making a color and pattern for you, and then someone is taking it and they are making the project for you, and you're designing it. Like, you go and you pick out the colors, you go and you pick out the design, you go and you pick out the shape, and like the whole community and the whole piece of like making garments, and then they last for a long time, and you're passing them down, and each event you're always making, like, clothing is like a big deal, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's a very big piece of your culture. And we don't have so much of that anymore, of like, so knitting, we are making clothing for our community, and it's very interconnected with our community, and how that can be, because it is such a connecting piece, and it is so a beautiful piece of our communities. How can we add that into, it has those sentimental reasons, and the reasons we do it, that it is so healthy, turning that over into something that we do as humans is so natural. And it'd be really cool that if we did have that piece as our culture and recognize that would be really lovely.
Moving more toward
to those it's actually connection with all those handmade pieces.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you've heard of the Center for Knit and Crochet, but they have a crowdsourced collection where people are posting very sentimental, some old items, some more modern items, but they're they're archiving all of these sentimental pieces that people have had over the years. And that crowdsourced collection has so much potential to be inspiring to people. And I find that, you know, just like what you were saying, that when we think back on generations and we think of the tradition and the history behind knitting, I think there's so much to that we've only scratched the surface tonight of how beneficial that can be for people to think about having that mentality and having that sense of community is really a broader than just our immediate community, but it gives us a sense of history. You know, why were they knitting socks for the war effort, right? Why was that an initiative? All of the craftivist movement, right? The pink hats. You know, I think back on how much of that will go down in history, really, and handwork has always had that power to it.
Yeah.
And the more that we embrace that, the better, I think, because it gives us an outlet to feel like we have a sense that we're doing something, and that sense of self-efficacy in those situations, I think, is really. I think that we benefit from that more than we realize.
Yeah. And I think it's almost like for people who have never felt like, for people who have never felt like artists, it's something that it is an art form. It absolutely is. I mean, it's both practical in craft, but also really steeped in a very artistic tradition as well. And so I also think that something that we're always looking toward is like leaving some sort, that's a way of like leaving a little bit of a legacy, you know, both in physical form of things that you can leave to your children, that you put out there in the world, and then also the doing, you know, teaching someone how to do it is also a legacy, a community legacy that is living now, and then you don't know what will happen.
Right. Yeah. And I really think that the new knitters, right, the power of, we're probably close to 7,000 knitters that Project Knitwell volunteers alone have taught to knit. And you think about, that's really been such a, that has been so powerful within our immediate community, but there are so many people doing that across the board. I mean, we all have had folks that we teach to knit, and I feel like I've taught so many friends to knit. You need to try this. You know, I have friends that have faced grief, have faced really hard MS diagnosis situations, have faced really challenging circumstances. And I've said, you know, this really has worked well for so many people. Why don't you give it a try? It may stick, it may not. That's okay. You know, you can give it a try. My cousin broke his femur last month, so I taught him to knit online, you know, and he, you know, it was like a blessing for him. And he has a 4-year-old, and she learned at the same time. So it was really, you know, it's kind of continuing that tradition and giving people opportunities to connect. It's really, I just find that it's one of many outlets, but it's a really, really powerful one. Knitting in particular is particularly powerful. And I'm just excited by all the opportunities to share it. And I see that, you know, the knitters that are part of your community, I think really recognize the comfort and joy, right? I mean, I connected so much with this series throughout the pandemic because I kept thinking, yes, that is what this is. This is comfort and joy. And maybe it's the only comfort and joy I'll have this week, but it's something, right? So, yeah.
Oh, we
really
love it. Well, we have to wrap it up before we get
so we can
here.
save this and
good.
more people watch. But thank you, Lauren.
So.
We're so excited to tap into more. I want to, you know,
we plan to work with Project Knitwell.
I'm so excited. That after school program will happen someday.
Yes.
And we will celebrate.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you
so much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Everyone.
Yes, it was so great talking to you.
And
Great to talk.
Open Stitch is on Saturday mornings from 10 until 12. There's something on our website under the events tab, the Zoom link for every Saturday. You're welcome. It's 10 Eastern time. Drop in when you can.
Yes.
And
let's
we'll
go get our endorphins, get our neurotransmitters.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have some great topics on our K2 Together series. So you're welcome to join us on Wednesdays and Saturday afternoons. You can just jump from Open Stitch straight into that.
Oh,
Yeah.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Love you all.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks.